Welcome to the Glamping Guy podcast, episode 11.
And I related a lot what was happening in the glamping industry to what was happening 20 years earlier with the independent lifestyle boutique sector, where people were coming into the hospitality industry that had never been in there before. Barry Sternlick, Chip Connolly, the list goes on. There's a bunch of them that came in
Chris
back
Jeub.
in the 90s and early, but that, yeah. And they came into the industry and they really changed it because they looked at things differently.
Hey, I'm Chris Jeub, the Glamping Guy. In today's episode, I had an incredible conversation with Todd Wynne-Parry, a seasoned leader in the hospitality industry and author of the new book, The Business of Glamping. Now, Todd's experience spans decades in the hotel industry, a time when consolidations were all the rage, but his passion turned toward glamping because of the unique and personal trends it offered. He was intrigued by the fact that those getting involved, much like yours truly, weren't your typical corporate consolidation types. Instead, they were individuals stepping outside the traditional hospitality roles, and that change really fascinated him. Throughout our chat, Todd shares insightful thoughts on why glamping is distinct from the big hotel industry. He emphasized how the glamping operator is crucial to the experience, a hands-on creative role that's often the foundation of a great glamping stay. We also delved into some challenges of the industry, like the rush to development when interest rates were low and the unexpectedly difficult regulatory landscape. Todd shared an interesting perspective on growth, explaining how the person who leads the development phase of a glamping operation might not always be the best fit to lead once the growth is complete. It's an idea I found really relevant in our glamping community. Plus, we talked about how glamping can thrive even in less than ideal venues. Sometimes what seems like a drawback can turn into quite the unique selling point. Todd also encouraged new operators to reach an audience beyond traditional campers, people who may not think of themselves as outdoorsy, but could benefit from a comfortable, nature-inspired experience. I can't wait for you to listen to this insightful episode with Todd Wynne-Parry. Hi, Todd. Welcome to the Glamping Guy podcast. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you, Chris?
All right, good. Hey, can I flatter you just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna flatter you a little bit because
Okay.
when you know my story. I've been at this. I just finished up my 6th season of glamping,
Yeah.
and after a couple of years trying to not really knowing what I'm doing, I started really taking it seriously and getting involved in different organizations, different Facebook groups, and not a lot of people out there who were talking the glamping scene. And I joined the American Glamping Association. And I remember these meetings of a bunch of guys in the room, guys and gals and people in the room. And you shown to be, you were the expert in the room. And I very quickly realized that when I was doing it. So that's my flattery, that you knew what you were talking about in these rooms. And there wasn't, there's hardly any books out there talking to the glamping owner on how, or the landowner, on how to build an operation on their private property. And lo and behold, you just came out with a book.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's more out in the market than I thought, but they're mostly in the UK. And mine, as you know, is a collection of articles that I did for the Glamping Business America's magazine, and just kind of put them together into a book. But it didn't go exactly. The articles weren't put together over the course of 2 or 3 years. They weren't really put together with any end game in mind, but it kind of followed suit from, okay, you think you want to get into this business. Let's ask yourself a bunch of questions about that, and really let's get real with it. And then if you do determine that this is what, it's a lifestyle change or whatever you want to do, then let's look at your site or the site, or let's find a site, and what's that going to look like. And then now you're on the site. Okay, now how do we organize the site itself? And then kind of progressed on to different operational issues, food and beverage, labor, you name it, whatever there was an article that I wrote somewhere around it: regulation, entitlement, all the big stuff. And so then when we had this basket of articles, we started trying to put it into that same kind of process of thinking about before you even start, what are you going to do? And then as you start, then when you get into it. And so that's kind of how the book sort of progresses. And that's more or less how the articles progressed with the magazine.
Yeah, it's an organic book that you wrote over time and from your experiences versus a book that got dropped into Chat GPT. I think there's a lot of books like that out there that don't really have the background that you have. Let's talk about your background, where you came from in the outdoor. Like I said, in the meetings, you knew more than anybody in the room. And and actually, let me flatter you a little even more.
Okay.
I took a lot of your advice. I mean, honestly, there were lots of discussions in the rooms and things like that. And I remember taking some advice and applying it to my glamping operation. I mean, you've made me money, Todd. So that's good. Really, really good. But how about you? You go ahead and give me your bio of where your years of experience in outdoor hospitality and leading up to the glamping world.
Sure. So I'll do it kind of I'll try and be concise in 3 different sections, but I grew up in Michigan, and kind of a pauper. But before we became paupers, my dad was in the real estate business, and he did PR for the real estate association, and the annual boondoggle get together was on Mackinac Island in Michigan. I don't know if you know that place, but it's a lovely old, it's a beautiful old island, Victorian in theme. There's no cars on the island. It's only horse and buggy and bicycles, a lot of fudge, and so the smell of horse manure and fudge kind of goes through. But on the top of it, there's this ridge, and it's one side of the ridge is covered with these beautiful old Victorian mansions, and on the other side is the Grand Hotel, which was the scene for a number of movies through time. The last big one was Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve. And anyway, so we would go up there, and I just, I mean, I'm probably 4 or 5 years old at the time. I just thought it was the coolest place ever, run around this big hotel. And so I had this sort of thing in my head about hotels for ages. And then as time went on, I ended up working in hotels and whatnot through high school and college. And when I got out of college, I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I went to grad school and in Arizona and to get my master's, my MBA. And I didn't have any experience. I went right from undergrad to grad school. And the only experience I had was in working in bars and restaurants and hotels. And I knew that operation stuff, but I knew I didn't want to be in operations because it didn't pay any money. And so I tried to get a job like at J. Walter Thompson, because I ran the bar at the school, and the previous guy that ran the bar at the school was at J. Walter Thompson. And I said, oh my God, it's so cool. And we drank beers all night. And he said, come in for an interview tomorrow. And I said, okay. So I went in for an interview, and he says, Todd, there's 20 guys out in that waiting room that have 5+ years of experience in advertising. Have you done any advertising? And I'm like, no, nothing. And he's like, so what do you think? And I'm like, thank you for the experience of having this interview. It's great to get to know you, but I'm good. And so I realized I really had to stay into hotels, and I became a consultant with Laventhal and Horwath. And then I did that in California and then in Hong Kong. And at the time, the traditional path was, if you were a consultant for a big company like Laventhal and Horwath or Penelco Forrester, you lasted 2 years, and a big hotel company would pick you up and make you an internal analyst. And if you did well as an internal analyst, then they make you a developer, and you go out and try and expand the brand, business development kind of thing. And I just had a weird angle to it, where I went to Hong Kong and I was doing it all over Asia, the consulting thing. And then Marriott picked me up to be their in-house analyst. I was the 3rd guy for Marriott to be in Asia. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then Westin Hotels picked me up to be business development guy for the kind of the southern part of Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia, New Zealand, South Pacific. And so anyway, so I did deals. I was doing deals for them for ages, and then I went on to work for other companies and whatnot. I came back to the U.S. in 2010. And continued doing development, mostly for boutique lifestyle hotels and things like that. I thought those were more interesting than boring old Marriotts. And then the last company I was working with was called Commune two roads, commune, destination hotels, and it all got sold to Hyatt. And I had a little piece of that company. And so I was able to take sort of a mini retirement. I bought my house in Bend, and I really wanted to take a year off and just be and not do. At the time, I was providing some pro bono consulting to AutoCamp because
Okay.
a good friend of mine that I'd known from Asia, he was the one that organized the Whitman Peterson 115 million that got injected into them back in what about 2018 or something like that. And he said, they're not growing very fast. Can you go help them? And I said, yeah, sure. So I was working with the CEO to give them a, straw man of a growth strategy and some things to think about. And then they eventually said, can you just join and help us implement some of this stuff you want to do? And I was like, okay. So I didn't really want to. I wanted to take my year off, but I really fell in love with the sector, and I thought what they were doing was pretty cool. And I related.
That was in 2018. So
2019, yeah.
2019, okay.
Yeah.
Time for a glamping glamercial. Glamping is the sexiest asset class in real estate, blowing traditional real estate out of the water. If you are a landowner or a potential landowner or an investor who wants to get into the world of glamping, I invite you to my 4-video course, Easy Entry to a Glamping Business. I'm Chris Jeub, the Glamping Guy. You may have seen my videos online. And I attest that while traditional real estate investing boasts maybe 10 or 20% returns, glamping typically returns 50%. In my 5 years of hosting a modest glamping operation, I have grown 100 times my first year's earnings. I will show you how you can do the same. So go to glampingguy.com/easy and get registered today to learn easy entry to a glamping business.
And I related a lot what was happening in the glamping industry to what was happening 20 years earlier with the independent lifestyle boutique sector, where people were coming into the hospitality industry that had never been in there before. Barry Sternlick, Chip Connolly, the list goes on. There's a bunch of them that came
Chris
in the 90s and early, but and they came into the industry and they really changed it because they looked at things differently. They were like, people don't want beige everywhere or grayish. They want cool design, and they want service that is in keeping with how their lifestyle is. And so it really changed the hotel industry for ages. And then by the time 2018-19 came along and my company got sold to Hyatt, and Hilton had bought their lifestyle brands, and Marriott bought all of Starwood and all those brands, and IHG had bought Kimpton, and I was like, okay, that's not how that sector works. I was really kind of bummed, to be honest with you, that all of those cool hotel brands had been corporatized and homogenized to a certain extent, and then franchised as well, which was crazy because it was never about franchising. It was about hospitality, managing, taking care of people, not just growing a brand willy-nilly all over the place. And so I was kind of bummed. But now I saw this new thing happening where people, again, from completely outside the hospitality industry, were diving in to it. And then I saw also the change in technology, meaning you could leverage online travel agents or OTAs such as HipCamp or The Dirt or Airbnb or whatever. You could leverage that technology along with supply that you bring in, whether it's in your backyard or a more institutional level in a big site near a national park or something like that. So, and then you've got the millennials, certainly the younger millennials and Gen Zs, who are really just blown away by TikTok and Instagram and people going places and seeing things and doing things. And so it wasn't about buying a Hugo Boss suit or a Louis Vuitton bag. It was about going to that awesome concert or traveling to Greece or doing something cool. And so these two sort of big, mega trends of the technology and travel and these younger generations valuing experiences over things just made me think, well, this is definitely a sector of the hospitality industry that's got some legs. So I was happy to kind of dive into it deeper with AutoCamp, and then the pandemic came and they had to downsize, and me and a bunch of other people, mainly with gray hair, we were shown the door, and so then I started consulting to the sector. And the aim of this of my consulting was always the same, which was to bring to people who have not been in the hospitality industry or done hotel development, bring to them, a little bit of my experience from, what works and what doesn't work. And usually they're big fat bits of advice around, don't get out in front of your skis financially, and
Mm-hmm.
if it's under 20 units, it's probably going to be a lifestyle. You're going to be cleaning toilets and you're going to be fixing fences and you're going to be doing those things. And it's over 20 or so units, and you're generating a decent amount of income. Maybe you can have a manager and go on vacation every once in a while. So it's usually those big things, because I actually spent a lot of time looking at the motel industry and the bed and breakfast industry. And we basically, in the bed and breakfast part, we came to the same conclusion, was that it was going to be difficult to corporatize bed and breakfast because the critical factor is that the innkeeper, and you can't corporatize an innkeeper, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyway, that's a very long way of giving you my background, but thank you.
That was a fantastic review. Because that's really you're almost like explaining the mirror that I'm looking in, because that is how I see. Well, you know me, I left teaching to go into glamping, but
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys. I'm an outsider, had nothing in hospitality,
Yeah.
but discovered this real joy, this love for hospitality I didn't even know I had. And Wendy and I just have been growing ever since. But here you came in from the hospitality world. All of a sudden, you have a lot of people like me, like my audience, asking you a lot of questions over what how to make this work. I'm very, very curious about what you said about getting too far ahead of yourself or getting ahead of your skis and seeing there's been a boom in people getting involved in glamping. But have you seen like a lot of mistakes, like a lot of people getting too into it and not making the good decisions that would lead to their success?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's been a lot of that. I think that the pandemic, to a lesser extent, but really the interest rate jump that took place afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Really, if you had an SBA loan or you had any kind of floating interest or whatever, all of a sudden your debt payment went to, doubled or even more in some cases. And so, I've seen a few distressed assets and distressed things like that. And that's kind of that's a bummer, because on paper and the pro forma, as long as your debt line remained the same, then you were okay. But the minute that jumped up, and typically people don't really do, a deep sensitivity analysis, and even if you were in 2019, 2020, early 2020 or 2019, you were running your pro forma and you said, well, let's do a best case scenario, a most likely scenario and a least case scenario, probably nobody would say, well, my interest rate's going to go to 9% or 8%, right? Unless
Right.
you got as much gray hair as me, you don't remember when debt was that level. And there had been a number of years where people were in the 3s and the 4s and the 2.5s and stuff like that. I think that
It's almost like free money. It was like free money, and it felt like it was going to last forever.
Totally. Yeah, and so I don't think, even if you pro forma it out and you said worst case scenario, we double, the interest rates double, I don't think you'd do that. I think you wouldn't have done. I don't know if I would have done it.
Yeah.
I probably would have done something different. Like I would have said, let's drop the room rate by 30% and let's drop the occupancy by 10, 15 points or something like that. And that might have been how I would have done it. I wouldn't have done it using the debt situation. Might end up the same result, maybe, but so I think a lot of people did a lot of people have had some trouble since then. The other thing that's interesting is the entitlement issue and the difficulty in scaling and now I'm talking about more big companies. I'm not talking about individual, as I call them, individual lifestyle operator, or an ILO, not those folks, but for the more institutional investors like the auto camps or Under Canvas or Getaway or Collective Retreats. I don't think any of them really saw, I think they all saw that they could scale much faster. They planned on scaling, they loaded up, they had a lot of development guys running around, turning over every stone and trying to grow.
Right.
And it just, a combination of, the getting the entitlements from local governments and municipalities being a roadblock, and then add on top of that the interest rate movement and the scarcity of equity that wants to sit around for 2 years so you get your act together and get it up and running. I don't think anybody really saw that, to be honest with you. I think everybody thought they were going to scale much faster. Now, in the case of auto camp, which is a heavy lift, right? It's not easy to do an auto camp. They're very involved.
Yeah, explain it. Auto camp is how many units in an auto camp?
So there's some that are smaller, but I think they
how many operations do they have in the country? Like
I think they've got 5 or 6 now,
okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've got Guerneville, which is actually the second one. The first one was Santa Barbara, but that one's gone. Then the beta site was really Guerneville and Russian River, and then Yosemite. And Guerneville is about 30 units, and Yosemite is about 104.
Yeah, Yosemite was the big one that I've seen pictures of
yeah, that one. And then there's Cape Cod, and there's Asheville, which just went through the hurricane. Luckily, I think my understanding is they were able to bring most, if not all, of the units to higher ground, so that was good. Right. And then they've got Saugerties in the Catskills, and Joshua Tree. So they're really kind of full blown hotels, to be honest with you. I mean, there's very limited food and beverage, but they're really a full blown hotel, and it takes a big team to get one of those open. So doing more than 2 or 3 a year that's a lot of stress on the machine. And I know this coming from a company. We had 85 hotels, and if we were opening 3 or 4 in a year, we were, divorces are happening, heart attacks are happening, depression's happening. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard on the transition team.
That's really grinding it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're always balancing. Do we hire that next person yet? No, not until that one thing opens. And then, okay, let's not hire again. And then, so you're always playing that game, and it stresses people out. So that was part of the reason why I suggested they do the Field Station brand. I didn't know what it was going to be called. I just said, you should do what Lodge is doing. Those guys are taking old motels and, really bringing them into this century with a very outdoorsy kind of flair that is a lot quicker to market and a lot less stressful. You don't have to really build anything. You're probably just, redoing the lipstick and the cosmetics on it. And so that's where Field Station came from. And now if you're doing 3 or so full auto camps, and then you're doing 1 or 2 field stations a year, you're doing 5, that's probably sustainable. Much more than that. It's hard. It's just hard. Yeah.
And what about the small, really, man, that really was me in 2019 and 2020 also. I mean, it's like what I hear you saying here is that you're talking the big guys, the people who are putting out hundreds of units and multiple properties. I've gone through some of the same things though, especially when you talk about the regulatory obstacles that I've had to go through. And at first you think, I'm going to build these. There's market demand. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And bing, bang, boom. And then all of a sudden you find out there's this whole regulatory process that you need to go through. It does slow things down 2-3 years. And it's like, that's weathering that is hard when you're a small shop and trying to clunk along and pay the bills while you're running it. You end up having to rely on your W-2 while you build this glamping operation.
Yeah,
that's just the small guy, which is really my audience, Todd. The landowner who wants to build these safe, legal, and profitable glamping operations. It's the moral of the story is that it's harder to do than
and I think too a lot of folks, and maybe this is yourself included, you you kind of you get thinking about it late at night. Your mind is racing, and you think, okay, I want to have these things, and I want to do this. And you have, I think you obviously have the heart of an innkeeper, and you're thinking you want to take care of people. You want to make sure they have a good experience. And they can do this, and they can do that. You might be thinking, ooh, and I can earn a bit extra money, but I'm giving them joy in some service that you provide, they have to pay for or whatever, but you make a little extra dosh on the side, and that's good. But you're thinking about it in terms of this sort of end thing sometimes, and you think you need to get there right away. But in the hotel world, while they may have all the rooms set up in the first go, there's always a capital plan for every year, and where you're improving, and you might be redoing something or adding a feature or adding this or adding that. And that's okay. When I was with Commune, we had a Carmel Valley Ranch in Carmel Valley, and John Pritzker was the owner there, and he really wanted it to be a sort of summer camp for adults, is the way he envisioned it. I mean, it's a big place with a golf course and all this. So the golf course makes no money, but anyway, his philosophy was that because small group meetings and things like that was really a core, mainly kind of coming out of Silicon Valley, because it's only an hour and a half away. Steve Jobs held his executive retreat there every year up until when he died. And this was only like his top 8 or 9 guys, right, for a couple of days. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to make sure that every year they came back, there was something different, whether it was beekeeping experience, salt making experience, chef's garden table in an amazing garden. There was a new pool club. Every year there was horseback riding. There was a new trail. Every year he wanted to have something new that was another activity or an enhanced activity that the returning guests could experience in their summer camp. But it's Carmel, so it's kind of summer all year round. But anyway, I always thought that was, great. And because I think it kept the team thinking about what's the next best thing that we can do? What else can we do for our guests? What would they want to do? And I think for a lot of people starting out in the glamping, I think they're concerned that doing some ongoing work might upset the flow or whatever. But I feel like guests are usually quite, sympathetic to that. Hey, we're sorry this part's not open right now, or it's a little ugly over here, but we're going to make this better for the next year, kind of thing. And so making it, sort of like the journey. It's not the destination. It's a constantly changing and evolving journey. And I feel like the people that do that, the innkeepers, the hospitality people that look at it that way, they get a lot of joy out of it. Right? They get really, they're constantly looking forward. The other thing too in the hotel industry, that's people that aren't in that industry might not really understand, but you kind of have 2 different types of general managers at a hotel, right? And this is a little bit relevant. There's a starting general manager and not a starting general manager. So if you're going to open a brand new hotel and you bring in a general manager, maybe a year, 18 months before opening, that guy is all about it. He's going to get everything set. So on day 1, the first guest arrives, everything's perfect as it can be. And then he's going to spend the next 2 or 3 years working out the kinks, getting it really right, and really making it as best as it possibly can be. By about year 4, from a hotel company perspective, you got to get that guy out of there. He's got to go. He or she doesn't matter what sector. You got to get him out of there, because he's
why is that? Why is that? It's just
they're going to Peter principle out. They're going to figure out everything to not be putting out fires all the time, to not innovating. They're just going to be getting everything exactly how they want it, how they think it's right. They may be great. Don't get me wrong. It's not. This is a generalization. It's not across the board. But typically, there's a starting GM, and they just love that challenge. And they're going to put their ship. They're going to build their ship, and they're going to take their ship across the ocean. But once you get them across the ocean, 2-3 years into the operation, they're stabilized. They got to go, because you got to bring in fresh blood to look at the ship this guy's created and say, well, is this the right ship for the waters we're going to do? We were going to go across the North Atlantic. Well, now we're going through the Caribbean. Different ship, different requirements. different guests, so you want that next general manager that's more of a refiner, if you will, but really excited to being the captain of that ship and guiding it. And so I think that some people heading into the business, they might be that first general manager. They may be they love the idea of, plowing that road and building that other structure and doing all these things and creating this thing. But once they've created it, then they're itching for that next thing, and it might not be that, and they may not be looking at it through the lens of what's my guest experience, what are they doing, whereas the next person come in, it might be different. So it's one way of looking at it.
You see that with like landowners, just regular landowners who are putting up glamping operations on their private property. You see the same thing, that they, after a few years, they should maybe get out after they created everything. No, and I say that because one of the things that I've been kind of an evangelist about is the whole idea of an exit strategy for our business plans. That we don't, the creators tend to not think that way. They don't think about actually leaving the property and selling it and moving on. But I've been an advocate for that, just based off of what I understand about just healthy business plans, business plan development. But it sounds like that's exactly what you're saying, is that we should be wise enough to leave our position of creation and leave it into someone else's hands who are more like long-term operators who will just keep the business going.
Yeah, and there's a nuance there. I think if you're, it's where you live and it's your land and you're building the glamping experience on, and your homestead basically, and you're adding rooms, and you're kind of moving along, and every year you're progressing it. It's like there's no end in sight, right? There's no, you never max out kind of thing. Then that's, and you've accepted it as your lifestyle. And certainly there's, B&B innkeepers all around the world that they love it. They love it. They love every day meeting a new guest, meeting new people from, all over the world, and spending a little bit of time with them and giving them great hospitality. I mean, there's people like that. It's in their heart and soul. I would contrast that with someone who's bought a piece of land and going to do 20 units and run it and make it all happen. Yeah, I think then in that situation, you either do set it up to sell to the next guy, or set it up as an operating business, and there's a manager, and that's one of the many operating businesses you have. I think there's a distinction there.
Well, I kind of agree with maybe there's not a nuance to that, because if you are a landowner, I see, and I feel, I guess I feel it, that eventually I'm going to burn out if I create, and I actually do create the thing. That I don't know if it's in me to operate it. Or I do love, like what you said, I love the idea of meeting guests and being giving the flavor. The Chris and Wendy Jeub, I give that to my guests. But quite frankly, once all this development is done, will I be bored? Well, I might want to sell it and move on and do something bigger and keep creating. I kind of agree with the latter, that this is a nuance, that this is something that we should recognize as glamping developers, even if it is on our own land. That this is more than a mom and pop shop. This is a real business that needs an exit strategy. We need to get ready for that once we have things built.
Yeah, and I know that's hard for some people, that particularly they put their whole heart and soul into it, and it's been their life, 90% of their life, let's say, and 10% for kids and family and stuff. But the other 90% of their working life has been this project and this business and this development. You say, well, maybe you should, step back a little bit, and they're like, no, this is my life. I don't want to step back. Or I think once you sort of reach that point where you're not getting the joy out of it anymore, or you're starting to sort of get to the point where the guests aren't giving you joy, but they're actually now the enemy, and they're just making your life difficult. Because that's part of. I
can tell you stories. There's been some moments, but I get that.
I know, and that's part of the, in a bigger hotel, let's say. The one I worked at in high school is 168 rooms. I just stayed there again the other night. There was a bit of a thing in the, hotels, they're a little bit they're a little bit like the Army in a way. I've not been in the Army, but I'm assuming it's where you have this other family, you have this sort of para family that's going on. And if your home life and your home family is a complete wreck, you find great comfort in this work family. And one of the things that creates a bit of esprit de corps in your work family is that, the guests can be complete enemies. Like, it's all of you guys against the guest, and that can be a thing. Or sometimes it's the kitchen versus the hotel staff, or, there's these little fiefdoms that can take place, and it's not healthy, I guess, is my point. And so if you're reaching a point where like the guests are just more of a, the cost and benefit is not adding up to be a benefit, then, maybe it's time to step aside or get some fresh blood in and have a look at how people are experiencing the property and what kind of things that they're really walking away with. And, watching those guest comment, the guest comments, reviews and stuff like that is, sometimes that's hard for people, but it's also hard to work through work looking at those comments. It's hard to look for omission, right? Because if you have a great time, you might say something, but if you have a horrible time, you might say something. So what are they not what's happening on there that they're not talking about? Which means it's either just okay, or it's bad. It's on the bad side, and they don't really want to rip on it. So reading for omission, I think, is always important with looking at guest comments and things like that. Like, what are they not saying, and why aren't they saying? Because I know they did this, and I know they saw that, and I know they experienced this, but they're not saying anything about it. There was one we had the original auto camp was down in Santa Barbara, and it was located kind of downtown-ish, off center downtown, and it was the front part of an old trailer park, literally an old trailer park, and the front 6 units had been created to be the first auto camp, and it was and the site was right next door to an old dive bar, like a really rough dive bar, and the dive bar would stay open until 2 almost every night. And I know, because I stayed in the unit right next to the dive bar, that the cooks and the bartenders would actually go out the back of the dive bar and party till about 4 a.m. After work. So I know this from firsthand experience. So when I looked at the guests, and AutoCam was talking about shutting it down, and I was reading the comment cards, the TripAdvisor and whatever, and the negative ones were the bar is really loud. It's a crappy area of town. I didn't feel comfortable walking out in front. Blah blah blah. There's all this stuff, all this noise around the specific location and the noise, stuff like that. And so then I started. Okay, well let me just not look at that for a minute. Imagine it somewhere else. What are the guests saying? And the guests were like, "Oh my God, I got to stay in the Airstream. So cool. This was right downtown. I could walk to everywhere I needed to go." There's like all these things that people loved about it. And so my recommendation to AutoCamp at the time was, hey, I know we're looking for the Yosemite site. I know we're looking for the beautiful woodsy commune with nature site, but actually consumers are seeing this as a really funky alternative accommodation in an urban center. So maybe there's something there, and we could look at other urban centers around the country and take an old trailer park or an old campground that happens to be, sort of still in the center of a town or near the center of a town, and convert that to an auto camp, not as this nature experience, but an alternative accommodation, a really cool, special alternative accommodation. I think I got the okay, Boomer, we're just going to do auto camps in the woods. Okay. Okay. But the point that I'm making is that if you just looked at those comment cards, you'd find that your answer would be, this is just the wrong place 100%, but it wasn't. It was actually, it was right to be in the town. It was just a bummer that it was next to this old dive bar, which makes it maybe just dive by the dive bar or something.
So it's almost like you can look at those negative comments, that you read about the dive bar being right there and people feeling unsafe and all that. You can turn that into a positive, or you just need to react to that realistically. I guess
for that situation, it was, I don't want to worry about. That's not entirely in our control. If we could buy the dive bar, then maybe it would be in our control. The nature of the immediate area, whether it was a bit rugged or not, and all of those things, and the road noise and stuff like that. I mean, no one was complaining about the road noise, or no one was complaining about the fact that it was the front of an old trailer park that looked a bit dingy. No one was complaining about any of those things. It was an urban environment. They were just complaining about the noise out of that one thing. So if you took that away, it was actually a really cool place, and the comments would all be really good. And so I think that's kind of my point, is that when you're looking at these comments and things, you need to read for omission as well, or you need to say, okay, here's an element that's not working. Now, if we take that away in some way, shape, or form, then what are we left with? Does it still work? And in that case, my personal feeling was it really worked, and I lined up about 4 different properties for them to do as auto camps in cities, but I was going to call it something like city camp, or just call it something different, not auto camp, but
Yeah. No, I identify because I'm right on the edge of town, and I've changed a lot of my verbiage because people didn't expect to have houses like right next door, but that's the way it is, and I've turned it into kind of a positive where people like the fact that they're 2 minutes from town. They're not out in the boonies, and the idea of a glamping operation being out, 50 miles away from your nearest store and nature all around you and stuff. Well, if they had that idea that this is the place where this place delivered that, it's just I'm not your place. And that's so, but that changes now. People who are just escaping their apartment in Colorado Springs or Denver just to get out for a weekend. Hey, now I'm your place. This is beautiful to them, and they actually appreciate they can walk to town or it'd be very close. So turns out to be
I think that's a worthwhile way of looking at it. Glamping doesn't always have to be where you're you only hear the the floor and the fauna and the crackling of the fire. It can actually also be just alternative accommodation, and certainly you look at, like, outside of Moab, there's a massive KOA there. I think it's like 290, 300 sites or something like that. And I think about 80 of the sites are actually cabins or glamping kind of units. And and they get easily $260 a night, something like that. When right down the road, there's, a Hampton Inn in Seasons getting $300 a night. And I'm like, okay, so those 80 units are literally penetrating the motel and hotel demand in that marketplace. So any pricing strategy or marketing strategy should really be aimed at that set, because that's what's happening. They're like, wait, I don't want to stay at a completely I'm not sure what I'm institutional what's the disinfected clean, I'm not sterilized room. When I'm in Moab, I actually want to be outside,
be outdoors,
environment, but I do want a comfortable bed and all that stuff. And so that market is looking, it's the same thing. They don't have their trailer on their back, they don't have a Sprinter van, they need accommodation, but they just don't want to be in something where they could be anywhere in the world. They want to be in something a little more unique, and I think that's why they're getting that kind of pricing for those cabins. They're not particularly special, they're okay, but it's just that you get a little more space. You're detached. You're not going down a internal corridor. Which is why I think the lodge stuff works as well. It's a little bit more outdoorsy than an internal corridor hotel. So anyway,
what kind of encouragement can you give the landowner who's looking into glamping to make that plunge and actually start doing some glamping on their property? You got any encouragement for them?
I do. I think it's first of all, I think it's bigger than just the business part of it. I mean, if you're in a location where we used to say, there needs to be an X factor, meaning, you need to be in a place that already has wind that sails. It's kind of hard to market an area that people aren't already coming to. You're pushing stuff uphill if you've got to, entice people to actually stay in that area. But, it doesn't have to be, Yellowstone. It could be a town that has a number of really great community events or something like that. But it'd be nice to know that people actually need accommodation before you go into the business in that area. And it would be good to understand what kind of occupancy and rates are in, say, a 10-mile radius or something like that, or a 5-mile radius. That would be nice to know that there's some pent up demand there, particularly in the high season, obviously. And then, but I think it's bigger than just the part where you're doing this business. I think you're providing an approachable way to nature, approachable way to get to be in this destination. And, maybe you're going to be a couple bucks, cheaper than the next guy down the road in a motel or a hotel, or maybe you're going to be a couple bucks more, but you're going to be delivering a much better experience. I think that it's a great duty. I think it's a great thing that you're doing, either whether it's just, again, providing an alternative accommodation choice for somebody, or the part I really like is when it's, somebody's really, this is like medium to high adventure, like for a lot of people, particularly if you're somewhat outdoorsy, staying in a tent is not that big a deal. You've done it a ton of times, and it's not, it doesn't get your, doesn't mean you have to go to therapy for anxiety afterwards. It's like not a big deal. Yeah. But for some people in the world, knowing that nature is only a millimeter of canvas cotton between you and where you're sleeping, you might as well be, climbing Mount Everest with a herd of bears behind you. It's really scary, and it's high adventure, and it's not soft adventure. It's hard adventure. Now, for those people, that's the one I really like. I like when, and then I think that's under canvas, probably a good chunk of under canvas businesses is people that are coming from different places around the world that camping is just not a thing.
Yeah.
And here they can,
but we're making it a thing. The glamping operators are making it a thing, and they're
but they can do it, and they do well with people going from place to place to place, particularly in the Utah and that kind of area, in the West in general. And I mean, this is memories for a lifetime. They go back and they tell their friends what they did, and their friends are like, "Oh my God, you slept outside? That's crazy!" And how did that work? And and they show pictures of it, and everybody's really happy. And I think it's a great service. I think, particularly for those people, because everybody needs to get out, and if they can get around a campfire too. I know there's a study I was just reading about. My corny saying was that the heat of the campfire melts our differences away, and the glow of the campfire shows our similarities, right? Kind of nose eye, kind of thing. And melting those differences away, I think, is really important, particularly in today's crazy information world. But but I read a thing the other day about where the orange and yellow of the campfire, as you're looking at the glow, and the dancing of the flames, which is the frequency of the way flames dance is the Fibonacci code. It's the same frequency as the earth. It's the same frequency as nature, and your eyes picking up that frequency and the glow, the orange and yellowy glow. Those things do two things. They calm you, and they also prepare you for sleep, which is really weird. But it and it has to do with the frequency that the flames are moving, and then the color into your retina is, for some reason, it's innate in our DNA that you need that to stay warm, and that's going to give you comfort. You're going to calm down, and it's going to prepare you for sleep better. So I think, like that, everybody could use a little bit of that.
That's just really interesting. There's actually studies that show that this is that's why a fire is so hypnotic and
Exactly.
draws you in. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Huh.
Exactly. Yeah, there's more to it than just, the crackling and the whatnot. Yeah, that's for sure. Particularly if you can get out of the smoke. That's not
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah. Okay, let's talk about your book before we
Oh,
go, and then let's
okay.
talk about your book because how can people find your book and all
It's
that?
yeah, it's the Business of Glamping, and an anthology of articles by myself, and it's on Amazon,
Hmm.
um, in paperback and hardback, and I think there's a Kindle version as well. There's a digital version.
It was one of my goals actually to come by your booth at the American Glamping Association's glamping show Americas, and I just got so busy and I didn't do it.
I was I
I
was
wanted to
there.
get it signed by the man.
I was supposed to be there for, I think I was supposed to be there for 50 minutes. I think I was there for almost 3.5 hours or something like that, because it was right before the Taco Tuesday thing. And so people just kept on bringing me margaritas and we're taking pictures and signing
Yeah,
books.
that Taco Tuesday, boy, oh boy, that gets wild and crazy.
I've never had a taco at Taco Tuesday because I've always been entertaining by a campfire somewhere.
Well, Todd, thank you very much. This is a wonderful podcast, and I'm
Oh,
sure it's
good.
going to help people who are really wanting to get involved in this wonderful market. I see great opportunities for people, and you're leading the way and helping people out.
I appreciate it. And you too, Chris. I'm really happy you've sort of taken it not from just experience of operating, but actually teaching people. That must give you joy, and that's awesome. Good for you.
That does. Thank you. All right, Todd.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Glamping Guy podcast. If you're inspired by Todd Wynne-Parry as much as I am, go ahead and grab a copy of his book, The Business of Glamping. It's packed with valuable information for anyone interested in outdoor hospitality. And if you love this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with anyone you might think is interested in the world of glamping. Your support definitely helps build the brand and helps me build more podcasts for glamping operators like you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Chris Jeub, the Glamping Guy, helping landowners develop safe, legal, and profitable glamping operations on their private property. We'll see you next time.